if we start off with a little bit about, if we start with you, Howard, first, a little bit about you, your background, how you got to where you are now, really.
So I started lighting shows, got started to get very interested in theatre at school, as I'm sure a lot of people do. And then leaving school, what I thought would be more interesting for me would be to go into a fine art degree rather than going and doing a technical degree. So I ended up doing 4 years at a place called Chelsea College of Art and Design, doing painting and sculpture and a mix of those two. But also on the side of that, also doing a lot of smaller shows in London and sort of fringe and lots and lots of off West End stuff. So probably, about 7 or 8 years of that, doing 25 shows a year-ish while studying. And then leaving that degree, I then started to do more of my own stuff, and you meet the right people and you start to make a career of it, I suppose. I was also doing some technicianing at a theatre called the Cochrane Theatre, which is now no longer, but it's in Holborn, which was great. And I did about 3 or 4 years there, earning some money on the side, and then took the leap to go and do it properly.
Yeah.
And then just hoping things work out, which so far, touch wood, I'm still a lighting designer, supposedly. So,
yeah.
As much as anyone is at the moment. But
yeah, brilliant. What about you, Tom? What's your background and route into it?
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a freelance lighting programmer. I started off when I was sort of 14 or 15 doing Amdram, where I grew up in Shrewsbury in Shropshire. Continued that through until I finished college at 18, and I got my first job in a little receiving venue in Leamington Spa as a technician. Whilst there, I learned the lighting control systems quite a lot more thoroughly, EOS especially. I then joined Leicester Curve as their programmer, where I met Howard. Went freelance from Curve and haven't really looked back.
Brilliant. And presumably you've worked together, endless time since, I imagine.
Yeah,
I think, Tom, you programmed your first Adrian Mole that I did at Curve about.
Yeah, very first professional show I programmed was for Mr. Hudson.
Brilliant. And it's clearly gone well, because you've stuck each other out till now.
Yeah.
So
so far, yeah.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Howard, I don't know if it's worth we'll just crack on. I don't know if you want to say anything, or if you want to just...
No, what I wasn't sure about going through all these things is how much everyone knows about the show. So what I've put together this sort of presentation with lots of different slides, but also at the start of it, I put the trailer, like the EPK for the show, just in case people... It's about 1.5 minutes long, I think. So I thought we could just watch that, just to give people an idea of what the show is. Basically, it's... should I just... Let me go to the first slide, and then I'll...
Yeah, no worries.
Oh shit, hold on. Sorry.
No, you're fine, don't worry. And yeah, please do jump in, folks, with questions. If you don't want to ask, if you've got a question you don't want to ask, just send it to me in a message, and I can always...
Yeah, anyone, please, by all means. What's the best way for people to alert?
Send me a little message, or put a message in the chat just saying I've got a question, and I'll slot them in as and when we can.
And Juliet tells the story of Juliet if she survives at the end of Romeo and Juliet, and she goes off to Paris and has a great time and meet lots of people, and then Romeo might come back, and all the trouble ensues with Romeo coming back. And then this is all set to the music of a chap called Max Martin, who is an incredibly successful songwriter who's written a lot of sort of the biggest pop hits that you've probably heard back in the 90s and thousands for Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears and Katy Perry and Taylor Swift and Justin Timberlake. But he's sort of like weirdly slightly unknown. He's a Swedish guy, very, very nice guy, who's very involved. But the songs are sort of world famous pop songs. So it's this weird mix of oldie Romeo and Juliet world set to this pop soundtrack. So
yeah. Brilliant.
So shall I play? The first thing is the trailer, which is about 1.5 minutes long. And I'm sorry if people have seen it, but I just thought it might be... do I need to do the share sound thing, Rory?
Potentially, yeah, potentially.
Oh, I've done it already. Okay, here we go.
Juliet plunges Romeo's dagger into her heart.
What if Juliet didn't kill herself? Really? That should almost be the start of the play.
Hit me, baby, one more time. Oh, show me love.
I still believe there's something hanging in the stars for me.
It's all about you're the one that I ever needed. Show me love and what it's all about. Oh, baby, it's my life. It's now or never. And I ain't gonna live forever. I just wanna live while I'm alive. It's my life. I got the eye of the tiger. Dancing through the fire. Champion. And you're gonna hear me roar.
You know, we should rewrite all your plays.
You hit me.
There we go. So it's subtle and understated. That's the important thing to remember about this.
Pastels across the board, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So should I just start doing this, and you can jump in, Rory?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
So I was asked on board, probably. So it's directed by a chap called Luke Shepherd, who I've worked a lot with in the past, and actually really talking about how I sort of started out. We were doing shows together about 10 years ago, maybe even 11 years ago. He was, of course, on board much earlier than I was, as this happens with new musicals. Directors are often, obviously, attached much earlier. He then sort of put me forward, and I had to go and meet the producers and meet the other members of the team, and sort of quite a fairly formal interview up when they were doing one of the workshops in London. And this was back in 2017, I would say, so really early, so it was about 2 years before it was even planned to do the show. And then got the job, and then so started attending the workshops. And there were several workshops in this. They did a few in New York before I was on board, and then there were several in London. And the workshops are basically where they present the show as it is then, usually with a small band, so they probably have a drum kit, a couple of keyboards, and then the cast, who aren't necessarily actually in the production as such, but they would perform the show to a small audience, and then the creative team would then get feedback on the production as it was then. So I was sort of it was quite nice being on board so early, because I was able to join quite early and actually see how the show was evolving over those years before we started the rehearsals properly.
Yeah, and what is your actual role in those workshops? I mean, what do you, as the
Not a huge amount. We just basically just sit back and watch. I mean, knowing Luke very well, who directed it, I was sort of able to have quite maybe a slightly different collaboration with him than I might do with a director I've never worked with before, because we're sort of quite friendly anyway. But really just to sit back and watch the show, and maybe feedback some very early, bigger thoughts about it, but really just to get a sense of the show at that stage.
Yeah. And I presume there must, at that point, is it a black box? I mean, is there anything to it at this point?
Yeah, it's just a black box with just some chairs and furniture. I mean, it's literally in sort of like community halls, so very, very basic. Maybe sort of an early suggestion of some choreography. One of the first workshops I went to, they only showed sort of the first 30 minutes of the show. Yeah. So that's sort of as far as they got, and it was very, very roughly staged. And actually, looking back on those recordings now, quite different to what we ended up with. So you can see how important they were for the process.
Totally, yeah. Totally.
Moving on, we'll zap through these.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next thing, I just thought I'd just whiz through the team. So without meaning to be too at the top of the pile, but so obviously I'm the lighting designer. So the associate and assistant, miraculously, was Dale Driscoll, and I can explain it in a minute why we only had one. Tom, who's here, was the programmer. The production assistant was Tom Johnson. So Tom was employed by the show to supervise the show going into Manchester. I should say we were due to see the show in Manchester at the Opera House, and then we sort of knew it was always going to be coming to the Shaftesbury in London, and so I'll sort of reference that a bit later when we start looking at some plans and stuff, like the difficulties that presented. The head of lighting employed by the show was John Wing, who I believe might be joining us today. And I think Dale might be joining us as well. And Amanda Leon Joyce is the deputy. And then we had 3 follow spot operators, the local crew, so in Manchester, and the Shaftesbury obviously have their own lighting teams as well. And then we also had crew, our own sort of lighting team, who came in for the fit-ups in Manchester and London, and they were usefully sort of the same people, so they knew the show going to Manchester, and then they could bring it down to London.
Yeah, and who decides the staffing level? I mean, who says to you, you can have X, Y, and Z, but not such and such?
Ultimately, in terms of the number of people, I suppose comes from the producers in terms of their Excel spreadsheets and their budgets. Probably that's probably one of the reasons why Dale had to pick up both roles. So usually an associate would be, I suppose, closer to me in terms of looking at things more from a design point of view. So we'd document the focus, sort of liaise with other departments, sort of note take, and just keep the lighting department sort of together while I'm busy lighting the show. The assistant would then usually look more after the follow spots, but bless Dale had to do both of those things, so it was quite a big old job for him.
And who in this cohort of people, who do you get to see in?
All of them really. Maybe not the follow spot operators, they would probably be provided by the theatre, because the theatre will know a good set of people.
Mm-hmm.
The crew, the fit-up sort of only crew, would be led by Tom Johnson. But yeah, most people on that team.
Yeah.
And knowing that it was important on this, because knowing that we were going to be spending 3 or 4 months together pretty intensively, it was important to get a good set of people who all got on. So
Definitely.
I can't remember what comes next, so I'm just going to click. Oh yeah, so white car model. So I just thought I'd show a couple of pictures of the white car model, which is the first model produced by the set design worlds. So Sutra is the set designer and her team. I just put here what we might try to gain from that. So this is obviously my sort of take on things, but looking at the white car model gives you a sense of the geography of the stage. It shows where you might be able to put lights and opportunities to feedback on where you might be able to put lights if those positions don't exist already. Particularly, I often find sort of inside the pros, if there's sort of lots of scenery there, it's sort of like fighting for real estate, really, saying, well, I'd love a boom there, I'd love a bar here, but if that piece is flying in here, we can't do that, So there's bigger discussions, bigger ideas at this stage. And then maybe a rough idea for set electrics. And I've put here that, the script is still being written at this stage. So they might be designing something to the model and then it gets written out of the show. So that just whole idea gets discarded. So it's still very early steps.
Yeah.
And here's just a couple of pictures of the white card, which is literally a white card.
Is this the first time you see anything design-wise?
Yeah. So there on this, the set department and the costume department had this huge extensive Dropbox of because this was such a long process for years and years effectively. They developed this huge sort of archive, and so I sort of got a sense of what the show was going to be visually, but this is the first physical thing that we saw. And actually, sometimes these end up nothing like the original, but actually this is, the final thing, but this is not far off what was arrived at. Yeah. Here's another one, which is very early ideas. And then, so yeah, this is an example. I'm hoping you can see this in enough detail on this Zoom thing, but I just thought it'd be interesting to show a plan that was drawn very early. So this is really without any lighting positions. So this is sort of a provisional ground plan drawn by the draftsman. So on a show like this, they actually employed someone to do all the drawings. So Sutra would build a model and then someone would come in and take the model away and draw it up into these, I think, really amazing drawings. Like this guy, Nick Murray, who do these, are like one of the best. But this is still very early days, so there's no lighting on here. So I would then look at this and try and work out where we can fit lights. And actually, if you look at how much flame stuff is, there's not a huge amount of space there already. This is very early on.
And is this the theatre in a theatre?
Yeah, so this, actually, that's a good point. So this shows the Shaftesbury, which is the smaller building you can see on top of Manchester Opera House, which is the huge building you can see around the edge. So it's an interesting point to make that they decided rightly to design it for the Shaftesbury. So knowing that we had the Shaftesbury sort of booked, it made our lives easier that we were able to plan for that, draw the plans for the Shaftesbury, and then sort of make them fit in Manchester. But going for the sort of the ideal perfect world, being the Shaftesbury.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just another example of a very early set drawing that I was given of one of the set pieces.
Yeah.
So then we move to the final model, and just a couple of pictures here of the final model. So you can see actually it's not that different from the white card, but this gives you a lot more sense of paint finishes, the colour. You know, things have been tweaked, things, and you can see that the Suture's put in a suggestion of this truss around the screens, which we knew was going to be very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When does it become too late to add and change? Because presumably this model is still a long, long way off. I mean, do things come out of rehearsals like they would elsewhere, or?
Yeah, I think it's show by show. I think on a show like this, because so much was done beforehand and sort of so much was planned, I think going into rehearsals, they had a very good idea of what the show was and knowing. Yeah. I think shows were less of a process beforehand. You might find bigger changes happen in rehearsals. But this was, this was all happening. I think this was probably near a year before rehearsal started, maybe 8, 9 months. So.
Is it hard to make? I mean, obviously, I appreciate that it's just model stage, but is that hard for you to make decisions? I mean, that's a year away from something that you've just seen a couple of workshops of. Yeah,
I think. Well, yeah. I mean, I love having that amount of time to sit and look at the plan and work out lighting positions and work out what we're going to do. I think the more time, the better. To be honest. Yeah, and particularly, so it's important to realise that by the time we were at this stage, I needed to have sort of fought for my space. I needed to have said, we have to have a lighting position here. We have to have and sort of having conversations like, well, we just simply can't light someone upright if we don't have a position in this position. So being able to actually be not necessarily forceful, but just holding your ground and say, look, we need to light the show as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And cutting holes in, making more slots in these sidewalls, for instance, for booms and entrances. And work out how much space off stage of these screens there were, and for instance, where this truss sat away from the screen to enable us to have the right units away from the screen.
Yeah.
Another example, another picture. It's quite an incredible model. As you can see, it was like very, very detailed. Another one here.
This is quite a good one in terms of you touched on initial thoughts around set electrics and stuff. I mean, who sets parameters for those things? I mean, do you get at this point, or
sets electrics?
Yeah.
So the designer, I assume, would design a set piece with electrics in mind. So then I would sit down with them and go through what they might be, go through sort of quantity, what bits might have lights in them or what type of light that might be. These the lights on the down right and down left structures, those brick structures actually got cut in the end, so those booms ended up on the truss, and they were sort of sourced from. So on the show like this, we also had a prop supervisor who has a team of people who are able to go out and source the show and prop the show, and those units were actually in the end found by the props department, sent to our set electrics company to then wire up, and so it's a collaboration in that sense.
Yeah,
but chosen by the designer. I mean, I didn't really get involved in what those lights looked like, because she had a very particular thing that she wanted. So,
yeah. Matt's asked a question here. Whose idea was the truss? Sutra, or was that a discussion that Howard had?
That's interesting. Yeah, a real mix between all of us, and actually Luke, the director, was really involved with that. In terms of, if you look at the brick walls, if you look at the floor, there's a danger that it could start to look quite oldie and quite sort of period. And, knowing the show had these pop songs as this sort of like in parallel with this older world, we know we needed to have something more contemporary on show for the whole thing to help with that. And also I should say this gauze surface was all projected on throughout the show, and then actually the back surface was video screen behind the gauze, which itself was that gauzed video panel stuff. I can't remember what the name of it is. So we could light the wall of the theatre behind the video screen, which would then light through the gauze. So once again, you've got the sort of oldie world of the gauze and projection, which is sort of the slightly more softer sort of period look. But then you've got this really like bright, punchy video screen.
Yeah.
It gives those two languages and the two worlds. But it was the trust itself was a real collaboration between all of us, saying we need something to set off this oldie brick and Paris French world. So
have you ever looked at a model? I mean, this is because we're so far in advance still, really. I mean, do you ever look at a model for a show and think, oh God, like I've got to deal with this for the next year and a bit? There must be, you can't love everything all the time. I don't mean this show particularly, but
yeah, absolutely. Or I think having that time, I mean, I just find just looking at the pictures of the model or looking at the model, I think it takes time for ideas to happen by looking at stuff. Like I think, the more you look at something, the more you go through ideas and work out what positions are going to work, how you're going to light certain pieces. What I think ultimately, what are the best places for the light to come from, and then that will then feed through into the plan drawing, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah.
But yeah, the more time, the better, I think, in terms of being able to look at stuff and digest it.
Yeah.
And ideas germinate from looking at something. Like, the more time. And I just put this slide together just to give some idea of like some of the pictures that we were looking at, particularly with like colour world of the lighting. And it's sort of, once again, it's that oldie sort of period thing set against this more poppy, heightened colour world.
Whose images are they? I mean,
I think I contributed these actually to the discussion, to the Dropbox. Remember, there was that huge Dropbox of, literally thousands of pictures that have been sourced over years, which I was able to use as like a Bible, sort of take ideas from.
Totally.
Ploughing on, we've got a bit to go, so one slide, yeah. So this is like not bearing my soul, but like showing something I'm not particularly proud of, but I just thought it'd be interesting to show, which was using the iPads. So these notes came out of a meeting with the director, which is where we sat down and went through the show and went, how could we light certain bits, So I know these aren't the greatest thing in the world, but I just thought it was interesting to show the part of the process. And this was probably like 6 months before rehearsals, when we look at the final model and going, we're able to do this. We don't need to be seeing the walls for the whole thing. We can just isolate this down, when we've got these two statues, for instance, on the right-hand side. Sorry, yeah.
Does anybody see these? Do you show these to anyone, or are these just yours?
No, this is just me and the director. But actually, interestingly, on the left, a bit embarrassing, but it's like those black rectangles are like probably actually like the first time when we thought, well, why don't we fly some ladders in stage right and stage left?
Yeah.
To make the truss sort of slightly more three-dimensional. And this was before they were on any drawings or anything, So it was literally sat on an iPad drawing going, and then like the white lines are beams of light, and so it's going, oh well, look, we could do this. Even though it looks like a 5-year-old's drawing it, but then there's a few more, just a few more like really, really basic, like really, really basic ideas.
Yeah.
And then so that's like suggestion of this light curtain thing that we ended up having actually, which might come from underneath the screen, to try and hide that sort of upstage area when the back wall's flown out there. The idea with the light curtain being that we can sort of lose the background and suggest that it goes on and on and on. So we don't always want to see the back wall of the set.
Yeah.
Just really simple. I like festoon, so I got a video idea. Let me see what's next. Oh yeah. So then I thought we'd move on to talking about the initial lighting plan. So this is like the very, very, very first starter tip, basically. So it's a very rough layout. I call it a bidding plan. I think other people do. It's just so what you'd use to sort of get your bid list from, as opposed to like the final plan that you'll work from. So it's really just to get an idea of quantity of lights, positions of lights. I put not really thinking about the budget. So I'm sort of at this stage, I'm drawing an ideal version of the design, not thinking about that we've got to get it in £5 a week or £6 a week or whatever. It's like I've just put just say I don't number them, because as soon as you start numbering, then you cut whole systems of lights. You get into a whole world of problems of having to renumber the whole plan again and again. So it's just leaving it very basic. And then I just thought I'd mention that certainly for me, plan drawing is a very sort of integral part of the process in terms of sitting down on the Vectorworks and looking at the drawings and working out those positions and deleting and adding stuff, and it's a real my way of working out the design effectively. I know there's an idea that the lighting designer might hand the plan drawing process over to an associate or something on the system. But I think for me, I don't think I could ever do that in terms of, yeah, someone might draw it to make it neater. But for me, sitting there and working through the possible options, I find a really, really intrinsic part of the process, and spending hours on it and deleting stuff and reinstating stuff.
Yeah, completely.
And then, yeah, just that Manchester versus Shaftesbury thing, you know, where do you draw it for? And so we actually sort of ended up drawing it for the Shaftesbury and then sitting it onto Manchester. So, you know, with that, the overhead positions will stay mostly the same. The biggest change will be front of house, obviously, because the theatres are so different. But, you know, the footprints and the layout overhead will stay pretty much the same. And then the production nutrition, yeah, so what I might do is, maybe I should just skip to the, so this is like a really, 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 really early version of the plan. So what I might do is send the production nutrition a screenshot of this and say, can we fit this for any vibers in here? You know, what's possible? Can we do a truss like this?
Yeah.
It's a really, really early idea that we might have a curved truss. Obviously that's never going to work because of the flowing scenery and it takes up too much space, but that was, you know, it's an idea that I drew. I think I actually sent this to the director and said, look, if we do this, then it wipes out basically like 4 meters overhead, so obviously we can't do that, but it was to just sort of show that. And then like rough ideas for truss positions, like having 2 trusses over the 4 stage there, for instance, over the 8. And it's, you know, I've just basically used the same light here. I'm not thinking really about the fixture type. I'm just thinking that where can we fit lights in? How many lights can we fit in? What positions are available?
Yeah.
Then this is another version of this, is like really, really early. It's in like May. Just sort of showing potential truss positions. You know, real mess, as you can see, but just literally very early. I don't quite know why I've saved all these, but and then a slightly more detailed version. In fact, I think this was the first plan we went into the bidding list for. So this was then taken by the production nutrition, and lists were made. And I should say this is much bigger than what we ended up with. You know, so this is a real example of draw what you want, the ideal, even though it's like looks like a plan on steroids, but it's sort of, you know.
Yeah. And when you've basically, obviously budget is your big constraint, but when you're not thinking about that, how do you start with something that is a completely empty room? Like it's totally up to you from scratch. Where's your start point?
Yeah, good point. I think it's moving. Well, on a show, various from show to show. On a show like this, it's certainly moving light systems. So overhead, knowing that this rig had to be, you know, it's a musical, thousands of cues, tons of locations and settings. It's, you know, the rig had to be flexible. So this spot wash system, we know is a system that works to give you ultimate flexibility. So you have basically lights. You have a wash light and spotlight wherever you can, which then gives you that option. So ultimately, I think it's where you can, now a show like this, because we're dealing with 3 walls, it's like, where can you fit lights in? Where can you fit bars in? And if you fit a bar in there, let's put a bar there with some lights on it, because, and I would not say for a second, I don't think, some people might say it's lazy. I don't think it's lazy. It's like covering your back, because when you're in tech and you're asked for something, you need to make sure you've got those lights.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you chance your arm a bit? Like things like your front house cover, do you beef that up going, that's probably I'm going to have to work backwards from here, so I might as well beef up at the start?
Yeah. And I would say, like, going in with the first list, I would always go in over, you know, go in knowing that you're going to be over and seeing what happens. You know, it's frightening, but we'll see in a minute. But it's frightening when it comes back and you panic. But yeah, certainly, I mean, front of house is ridiculous. Like, we ended up with about half of that. But it's going, I knew the show needs to be a bright, poppy, you know, clear show. We're not trying to do sort of arty 3/4 stuff here. This is like bright, in your face. Not much subtle. Well, I mean, there are, I would say it's subtle in places, but overall it's like a bright. So
one question before you move on from this one is, you've got 4 spots there. Now obviously like we know how it ends up, but how do you decide how many spots you need on a show?
So that's actually going back to those workshops. Actually, I'm sorry, I should have said that back when we're watching the show in the workshops. You obviously reading the script and watching those workshops, you get a sense of how many spots you're going to need. You know, if a lot of the show has 4 principals on stage, you can really make the case to the producers and say, look, I think we're going to need 4 slots for this show. I mean, it's excessive to have four spots, particularly in the front. You know, some shows might have side spots, which I understand about operators moving around. But to have 4 spots at the back, I would say is quite unusual. And I think I probably drew that as an ideal. I think it's probably going in and pushing your luck. You know, I think Rick Fisher once told me, he said, if you want 3 spots, draw 4. If you want 4 spots, draw 5. Because you always end up with, you know, like the producer. You need. I think a bit of this is politically being seen, say it quietly, but being seen to make compromise. And so if you go in higher at this stage, then I think people will appreciate that you're cutting. I'd say that quietly. That's a secret between us. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So like a really early version of the section. Like a front elevation, which was much bigger than what we ended up with in terms of units. And so I thought I'd just show a screenshot of this, which is a screenshot of me drawing the plan in Vectorworks, but just showing, I thought it might be interesting just to show how I put the model pictures in the Vectorworks document. So basically you're not constantly having to go in and out of the Vectorworks document to look at pictures. You know, doing it this way, you can zoom in and out and just hop down to a picture which is in your document. It's just the workflow, basically, of what I'm trying to show. And I don't, by the way, anyone that's a Vectorworks aficionado, I do not draw properly. I don't draw viewports and all that. I just sort of slightly bodge it, you know, I should say. So don't judge me on this. I just thought that was quite interesting, just and sort of leaving notes for yourself in the document. So it's going back to that idea that this is sort of like a working, it's like how you work your ideas out through this, through the plan drawing process.
There's a question coming here. With drawing being such an integral part, do you do any 3D drawing to help decide on positions, number of units, etc.?
Good question. No, I don't. But I probably should learn that. I probably should have spent the last 6 months learning that, as I know a lot of people have. You know, like try and upgrade that area. To be honest, probably because my Mac can't deal with it. Number one, every time I seem to mistakenly click on 3D, it crashes. You know. But yeah, I mean, that is totally the way to go now, isn't it? And I probably should get more on that, but no, I don't. And also, I mean, you can see the footprint of the light in the plan. You can see the elevation of the light inside elevation. So in terms of like working out where lights can go, like the 3D is mega useful for looking at the rig and sort of seeing what it looks like in the air, I suppose. Well, we'll come to, I mean, actually, as it happens, this was all drawn in 3D for this show because we did quite a lot of previs on it. So you'll see that in a minute. But once again, that's a money thing if the show can afford it. So
yeah, of course.
Moving on.
Yes.
Happy Rory. Yep. So yeah, so I've just put here production nutrition makes the first, so this might be dull to some people, but let's just zap through it. And then my sort of initial, that big plan is then added to the set drawings, so which is then shared across all departments, as it would be the sound designer as well, would sort of do his initial thing, that would be added to the drawings. And then we, which an example is this. So this is that initial plan that I drew with way more lights than we ended up with, but sat on top of a very early version of the set drawings as well, with way more lights in all positions than we ended up with.
Sure.
And then
quite an overwhelming thing to be handed, isn't it?
You are?
It's quite a big thing to be handed, isn't it? It's that suddenly it's all there in front of you, and like
yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting. Actually, speakers aren't on here, but it's interesting when you start thinking about speakers on the proscenium and like fitting speakers into all of this as well. It's like a big old jigsaw puzzle. So this is an example of that first list that was made. As you can see, it's like titled Lighting Higher Shop Perusal List, which was way more units than we ended up with. So it's interesting to show that.
Yeah, definitely.
Lasers, at one point we were going to have lasers, but they went, unfortunately. And then first was back, and I've just written "You Panic." Yeah, so basically on a show like this, we came in way over budget. As was sort of expected. I mean, to be honest, actually, I didn't know what the budget was. I find sometimes if you don't, you might get an inkling from the production manager, but sort of nice to draw what you want to do and then be told you can't do it, as opposed to think, oh, can I afford that? Can I afford that?
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, and there was a thought on this show. We knew this show was probably going to run for a little while, so there was always the option that we might want to buy stuff as opposed to hire it, because ultimately we're going to be hiring for a couple of years.
Yeah.
It's cheaper to buy it. So So this is an example of one of the quotes that came back, and then sort of how we were going through it, working out what we could cut, what we could potentially buy or hire.
What's the first thing to suffer and go? I mean, like, do you get rid of things like general coverage first because it's an immediate money saver, or how do you?
I think it's probably quantity. So if you look at each position, you can go, right, I've got 4 moving lights there, maybe I only need 3, so you can make trims. Yeah, certainly there might be some systems of units, but to be honest, show like this, conventional general cover like Source 4s are pennies in relation to the rest of the rig. So the big money is in the moving light side of things. Yeah. Particularly units, if the hire company has to buy the unit, then obviously that's a massive outlay for them. So I find I went into PRG, who eventually ends up supplying it, several times to sit down with Pete there and go through the list and go, well, what do you have? What can we use instead? Fitting it into what they had available and had quantity of.
Yeah.
Hard on this show because you're sort of asking for 25 of one thing and 30 of another thing. It's not like 3 or 4. It's like you need quite large numbers of the same type of unit.
And how do you consider those alternative units? I mean, what you started out with and what you ended with are completely different in terms of unit choice.
Yeah. So you just having to be flexible ultimately. Like having to fit it in within budget, knowing that you need a certain number of lights. And the thing that really sort of made this hard is that trust that we were talking about earlier, because we knew that we had to fill that trust with lights. That is sort of a real addition to what a normal musical theatre rig would be. You might just have 4 or 5 bars overhead, whereas with this, we had this huge sort of stadium trust that we knew we had to fill with strobes, and we knew we had to fill with moving lights. And, so that was the ultimate thing that actually kept tipping us over the edge, knowing that we had 30 moving lights to add on because of that. But yeah, just going through the cut, and thinking about cutting things and completely. So at the same time as all that's happening, you're looking at the final model and looking at the set electrics components, which also go to bidding by different set electrics companies. And I've just put here that, so the drawings that I would do, they're just really just for quoting. They're not certainly not to be drawn to be built from. They're really just to give the person quoting an overall idea.
Yeah.
So an example might be this, which I put together, which just showed the various sort of light boxes we had and how they might be channeled, what the units might be in each of the light boxes.
And who comes up? I mean, ideas wise, like, so something like this has bulbs and it's got tape and it's individual. Who comes up with those ideas? Is that you that says I want X, Y, Z, or Sutra, or? Yeah,
that's me ultimately. Yeah, I mean, I might have a chat with the director and say, are we going to want this sign to change colour? He will. I would say 99 times out of 100 say yes. So that you're going to have to put RGB tape in. There was quite a lot of discussion on this about the front face of these boxes and how transparent they would be and whether we should gauze them or whether. So that was the sort of when the set electrics company was chosen. I went down to the workshops and we experimented a bit with the front faces of them. And actually, that we used like this inky dye. I'll just put this here as an example of how one of them turned out. And the ladders that you can see off that terrible drawing earlier on the sides, those black rectangles on the iPad drawing that turned into real ladders. That's a miracle. And then another example here of the ballroom flat. So me just sort of, as you can see there, just give me a rough idea of the length of them, how many lamps we're going to need on each festoon, what the festoon is. But I mean, so you can see how primitive it is. So these by no means to be built from, but it's just for quoting really.
Yeah.
An example of that set piece when it's finished. Can't remember what's next. Oh yeah, just another drawing I put together, which has turned out very differently.
Yeah. And that's a space thing that turned out so differently, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, so originally I don't know whether anyone's seen the show, but there's huge house flies in the back, which took up a huge footprint. Originally going to have 2 levels on it with units on arms to backlight all the windows. And it turned out that had to be shrunk because it just didn't fit in the overheads.
Yeah.
Spacing. So it all got squashed and all the lights went. Just another idea, just an idea that. So this would go sort of to various set electrics companies, and they would look at this and say, "Well, I reckon that's going to cost $2,500 to," and then they would do their own drawings. yeah, I've just lost in the drawing here of a drawing that was drawn by the set electrics company. You see how much better it is, like showing this moon piece, all the bulbs on the moon piece.
Yeah, gosh. Just a few.
Yeah, it's just a cool battery. It ends up being battery power. Oh, and I'm not sure quite why this is here, but this is just front elevation, an early idea for. I think I maybe put this in just to show how we're sort of looking at these ladders at the back that flew in and out, how they sort of integrate with the set, or how they used to. Early ideas for how we get these X bars in.
Is that something that you have to? I mean, that idea there. That's such a. We'll see it in some of the pictures and videos and stuff, but it's such a noticeable sort of, dare I say, in-your-face thing when they're in use. How hard is that conversation with you and Sutra and Luke around like how you'll use that stuff?
I think it's so. I think this actually came from discussions with Luke and I mainly, that we wanted. So these ladders, the idea was that they flew in and out throughout the show. They ended up only having 3 on each, 3 strokes on each vertical. But we wanted something as a background. So where I was talking about that light curtain idea coming from the back, we also wanted, knowing the video will stop sort of above that, where that chap's head is, knowing that we wanted to be able to fill that space with something electric and something poppy and something contemporary.
Yeah.
And then we also had the added bonus that when they were flown out, we could also use them through the video screen and through the gauze, because this all sat behind all of that structure.
Yeah.
But it was really a Luke and I thing, that we knew that we wanted something quite contemporary up there.
Yeah.
And this is an example of the list, a really early list. This is in March, yeah, miles before rehearsal started, of just looking at the model and working out what each set piece might require and then how that's operated.
Yeah.
And that all these wireless systems, once again, is sort of, do you buy them, do you hire them?
And who can you tell us some of the stuff on there? Like, what is some of the things that you would say are essential on a sort of initial set LX requirement sheet?
Like this, well, this was really actually just to tie in all the departments. So this was like to send to the production manager, to send to teacher, to send to Luke, to send to me, to make sure that we were all on the same page. So, I would say just ultimately what the items are. So this wasn't, obviously this doesn't go into much detail about what they are, but it's just sort of knowing that, for instance, the jukebox, for instance, we know that needs to be quoted for, that it's going to have LED tape on the inside of it. The Romeo sign will be neon edge with bulbs. So it's really basic, primitive sort of general early stages. And first, I've just put here. So of course, the first electric speakers come back, and you start panicking again, and you make come back way over, and you make revisions. So there's an example of one of the quotes that came back, and then as sort of me and the production nutrition going through it, going, what could be made elsewhere? What do we need? What can we cut back on?
Yeah.
How do we make this fit within the budget?
When it was stuff like Setlex, I mean, when do you have to turn around and say, look, enough's enough. This is now, I've had to cut this to a point. It's just not worth it. Like.
Yeah. I suppose ultimately you just have to. Well, what I find is you just lay your cards on the table and just go to the director, go to the designer, and say, look, we can't afford to put lights in this.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? If they feel really strongly, they might potentially have a slightly more sway, or to be able to go to the production manager, or go to the producers ultimately and say, listen, we really need some extra cash to make this work.
Yeah.
I suppose it's, in a way, it's sort of, you can only do as much as you can. Ultimately, it's not your responsibility if you can't afford it. It's then to go to the higher powers and say, we really want, and they might quite rightly turn around and go, no, sorry, we can't afford it. In which case, you just don't do it. So then, at the same time as this, you're sort of then working on the final plan, which needs to be signed off early enough to give the production nutrition enough time to get his or her act together, which is obviously a huge job on a big rig like this. So this is a copy of the final plan from the Shaftesbury. This is. So you can see how tight it all is. You can see, sort of get a sense of the outline of the building around the side of the stage, and how little space there is for everything, particularly in the wings. So on the show like this, all the scenery was flown in the wings, which of course caused havoc with some of our backlights on the screens at the side and all of that sort of thing. So squeezing a biggish show into the relatively small shafts. Really was.
And Tom, when do you get a first look at this? Is this the first time you start seeing this, or are you involved by this point?
Yes, this is about the time when I sort of come on board once the plan's a bit more finalised. And the first thing I was really involved in was the previs, which I think's coming up in a minute, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is about now. This is sort of
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You can see what's interesting overhead here. So literally we're squeezing lights in wherever we, there might be down right and down left. There might be the odd tiny little position where we could have put bars in. I had bars there drawn originally, but had to get cut. But you can see how busy it is overhead, sort of flowing set piece wise.
Yeah.
How you're really squeezing stuff in.
There's
And
a question.
the house at the back. Yeah.
No, sorry. Go on.
No, I was going to say the house at the back, and between 4 and 5, you can see how huge a footprint that takes up in a really vital part of the stage, obviously. So the back
There's a few things not on there as well, isn't there? Like the strobe ladders along the upstage. They're not shown on there.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
It's a tense moment looking at it all, going, God, I hope it all fits and does what I hope it's going to do. Yeah.
So question.
Yeah, question. I know we're coming on to a bit of this later on, but at this early stage, how much do you consider colour, what with most of your rig being movers?
Yeah, interesting. So there's some conventional units which I probably leave to the last minute to specify their colour. You'd hope you might be able to do that a bit later, when you've sat in rehearsals, and also particularly when you got a slightly more sense of what the costume world is looking like. Design wise and color wise. But yeah, I mean, obviously the amazing thing about using so many moving lights and lusters and stuff is that you can leave those choices much later in the process now. The idea back in the day that you had to choose color weeks before rehearsals started is terrifying, so that is something that can be a bit more last minute.
Yeah, completely.
Thank heavens.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so I put this in. So it's just sort of, this is the final plan, and then this is just going back to that initial early version, which you can see is much denser.
Yeah.
Sort of subtly, I suppose. But final section. This is Shaftesbury. Yeah, I would never usually put the name of the theatre at the top of the plan like that, but I just felt, seeing as we were dealing with different theatres in quick succession,
yeah, of course,
it would have been bad to have got them mixed up.
Was it a relief knowing that you were, that you were going to do this once and then do it all over again?
Certainly knowing what the theatre is. I mean, I don't think I've ever been in a position where I've done a show out of town and then not known. But I know, but you hear about lots of shows out of town just not having their theatre sorted yet. So it's sort of, it must be awful not knowing what theatre you're going to squeeze a rig into. Yeah. So it was a blessing to know that we had the Shaftesbury.
Yeah, great.
And the front, so you can see those ladders as they ended up at the back, and the X-bars sort of fixed into the scenery, floating with no solution found. And that was, we had to do that on site actually. Mm-hmm. So this is just an example that I got sent by the production electrician of that surround truss being in at PRG. And seeing stuff like that gives me the opportunity to feed back on sort of, for instance, those strobes that you see in the middle of the moving lights, sort of how high those drop downs might be, or spacing of units. It's quite useful to see these sorts of pictures quite early in the process.
Yeah.
And then once again, being very honest here, this is the sort of thing I would send to the production electrician. Say, I don't want that go where I want, to change it to something I want. And then obviously he would then make this much better. And actually Dale, the associate, I think also put some sheets together which are much more professional looking, but this is just what and then this is just a little overview of the Gobras that we had made for the show. So you can see the left hand one is sort of a larger diamond, the middle one is basically just taking the revolve dimensions off the plans, the set plans that we were sent, and turning those into a very primitive black and white PDF, which would then get sent to whoever, I can't remember who made the Go with me, but Wasco. And then it's like, and knowing they were glass, I then sort of had a bit more fun doing a sort of broken down speckled
Yeah, nice.
Dust idea on the right hand one.
Do you do that yourself, or do you get Sutra involved in this?
I did these myself. But knowing how much they cost, there's then that huge pressure in tech to make sure you make sure you use them all, which I think we did. I think knowing that they cost thousands and thousands and thousands. So then the rehearsals start, and at the same time. So basically, I think on the same day rehearsal starts, the fit up starts in Manchester. So if you think they've got 4 or 5 weeks rehearsals, and then they're actually fitting up for 4 or 5 weeks before we even start the tech in Manchester. And then the production nutrition, just keeping communication with him and his team up in Manchester. And then at the same time, actually it was a few weeks into rehearsals, we started previs.
Yeah.
It's pre-visualization for anyone. Which we'll come to in a minute. But this was just I thought I'd give an idea of how the desks were. So this was sort of all these conversations were happening at the same time, but this was given to us to show where we would be in relation to everyone. Very high tech. Program on center, which is something I always try to do, because I just think if Tom's the one, or the programmer's the one setting the position of the lights, and they ultimately need to have the best view for symmetry.
Yeah, totally.
And then Dale, the associate, on the left hand side, and me on the right hand side.
Yeah.
Director in front of me, and actually video ended up behind.
Yeah.
So we didn't have lots of screens in front of us.
Yeah. When you when does your associate come on board? I mean, like, is Dale in Manchester while you're in London, or how does that work?
So I think Dale joined a few weeks into rehearsal, and he was able to then come to production meetings, come and watch some rehearsals in London. I think coming up to Manchester, we sort of arrived at the same time, really. Like the way things are, it's much so easy now that I can just FaceTime Tom, the production nutrition in Manchester, and he can show me a problem, and I can then respond like that, immediately. So sort of it's not necessarily needed to have someone from design point of view on site all the time.
Sure.
And then the producers behind us on the left. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
Always the sweat running down your neck thing. And then just an idea of
hang on. We also had a full production desk set up.
I was about to say that. We also had a whole thing, and Dale had so we had 3 stations.
We had an identical setup in the circle as well, so that we could work from stalls or circle without having to move equipment or anything.
How do you split your time? I mean, especially you, Tom. I mean, do you ever have moments where you're upstairs and Howard's downstairs, or how's it?
Not really on this production. We've done that previously. If the stalls are really low set, for example, and I can't really see the stage floor, but obviously the director's downstairs, so Howard wants to be with the director. But on this, we sort of stayed together. We'd have like a few sessions upstairs, looking at the floor and looking at the show from upstairs. Yeah, nice.
Sometimes we did the odd morning upstairs, didn't we? I think there's nothing worse than lighting 1,000 keys and then going upstairs and having your head in your hands. It just feels like you're having to start climbing that mountain all over again. I'm talking about the floor. The floor, thinking that 70% of the audience will be looking at the floor for the whole show. I think, taking care of the floor, dressing the floor is like a very, very important thing. And then, so this we'll come to, I'll show you something else about that in a minute, but this just gives a rough idea of like the desks that we had for anyone more technically minded.
Yeah, we used the NEOS system and had a main desk, which was an RPU, and a backup, which was a Geo. And then I had EOS TIs for production in the stalls and in the circle. And then there were various nomads dotted around for Howard, Dale, for the racks, for the stage console. We had a pretty extensive setup. Yeah,
just a small gig then. That's good.
I'm literally like this. I mean, I don't understand it. I just hope that that's the best. So then, like, a couple of, I think these were sent to me by the production. Actually, no, this might have been when I popped up just to pick up on things. And so, you can see how early this is in the process, and just seeing truss positions. And once again, though, it was interesting to see those back ladders as they sort of turned out.
Yeah.
After all that drawing and trying to fit them in.
Do you ever get this far down the process and go, oh, shit, this is totally not what I thought this was going to look like?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
I start panicking, like particularly like deading stuff, and And with a show like this, with the rig being on show, it was like quite important to make sure that it looked a certain way, that it had an aesthetic consideration to it. So we spent quite a lot of time in terms of angles of things, and we ended up gauzing the fronts of all of these strobes because when they're not on, we didn't want to see those sort of white silver, things, for instance. So stuff like that, yeah.
Nice.
And then back in rehearsals, so yeah, just a quick section on how we numbered the show, the score and the script. So this is a breakdown of the songs that we knew were in the show. So once again, like having had this extensive workshop period with the show, I think they went in sort of knowing what it was, knowing where the songs needed to be. And then this is sort of how it ended up being numbered. So we basically started every number on every song on a 100, which we did purely so that if, with a new musical, you expect songs to move around. I think actually as it happened, they never did on this. But we were expecting numbers to, jump around in the act, and if they wanted a song and perform another song. So we just felt doing this 100 system meant it was much easier to sort of copy and paste and dump up the end, just neater.
Yeah, and
it makes it a bit of a mouthful sometimes to call.
Totally.
But we'll hear that later. But he does a
One of the questions, Tom, I had for you is, does that fill you with fear, the thought that you're going to, do you link around these things, or do they move, do you have to move whole swathes of cues? How does that, if that had happened, how does that actually work?
I mean, as you say, luckily it didn't. But yeah, there's ways to do it. You can either link round, or you can sort of copy a whole section right out into a different cue list and trigger that cue list instead, or just physically move the cues and tidy up any wobblies that are in between. Yeah, there's lots of ways to do it. I think we did maybe link round stuff all the time in tech if we were jumping over bits or trying something different. But yeah.
It was something what we talked about before was that I find if you're having to relight a whole section, you might put a lot of work into that section. Actually, just to dump those cues down the end of the stack or into another cue list to save them, and then you can always just pull them back. I think it basically never delete stuff.
Never delete the data away.
never throw it away.
Yeah.
You never know when you might need it to come back.
Would you have if this had happened in Manchester, if it had all it had a right good shiggle about, would you have renumbered it when it came to town, or would you have left it with its linked looped state?
I think we would have renumbered it. I think.
As it's such a long running show, we'd have made it in a nice place for other DSMs to learn and things like that.
Yeah, totally.
Not get complacent. Fingers crossed it runs a long time. So once again, putting my cards on the table, this is just a screenshot of the score that I was. So basically on this, I spent a lot of time in rehearsal, much longer than I would in a normal show, just because I knew it was quite a big thing, big old undertaking. So I would sit for weeks and weeks on end, scribbling into the score like this, red lines sort of indicating cue positions, pink being numbers, key numbers, and blue just being notes on particular things that we might want to do, and it makes sense to me. And just a few more examples of this. I think green was follows, or effects. That's interesting to see.
Yeah. This is the first show you've done completely on iPad, isn't it?
Yes, this was the first. Yeah. Which is amazing, which is great. I've used it a few times before, but this is the first one I did the whole process, which is why I've got all this information still.
Yeah.
Usually this would all be in some dirty busted score, wouldn't it? And then this is just an example of Good Notes, which is the app we used the app I was using in the score, sort of all the scribbles.
Yeah.
And once again, the numbers corresponding to. And then just throwing a couple of examples of the script here, jumping between the scripts and the score, which isn't the neatest thing, but I would hope other people do it similar to this. I don't know, maybe people write neater. I don't know. And so using that score and using that script, I would then make myself on the offline EOS thing a very, very primitive cue list, which is basically just numbers with labels, which corresponds to those numbers in the score and the script. which usually goes straight into tech with. So at least you're just not necessarily even putting times in at this stage. Maybe it's a button you might put a 0 on it or something to save the time. But putting times on keys is so quick and easy.
Yeah.
So usually going into tech with this structure in place, which is great if you're taking out a sequence because you know where you should be. And then just a bit on previs. So we deliberately set the previs sort of room up at 3 mils where we were rehearsing, which meant that I could be in and out of the rehearsal room. It meant the director could pop in and watch a bit of what we were doing. Max Martin himself came and watched some, which was terrifying.
Yeah, I bet.
And then just to talk a bit about, so basically I haven't done a huge amount of this before, but what I found it most useful for was roughing in a structure for the numbers. So knowing what lights you might be using at what point in that song. By no means setting anything too detailed, not using any, basically, I think we ended up just using the lights on and off as opposed to sort of saying up 50, up 10, down 5, It's basically just like, so setting effects times to time out with different bits of music. Just sort of basically a rough structure, a rough shape. And actually, ultimately, it saved a huge amount of time because in the tech, when we got to a very busy number, we might have a very intricate cue, piece of cue structuring in already, and we knew that it timed out. We knew the go presses just had to happen at the right time.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So the problem with it, I think, what I would say is don't use. I don't think it's quite there to use too much color. I think I'm not sure the color really reads. I think James set this up, and James Simpson set this up for us. I think it was on WYSIWYG that he used. Don't use too much color because it just would always come out different.
Yeah.
We had one of every light in the WYSIWYG room, so we were able to mix color and set the iris sizes. Roughly. Yeah. Effects and strobes. So I'm afraid to say this is by no means anything we lit. This was just sent to me by the guy setting up the model, the 3D model. But this is the only photo we have, and I can't believe that we didn't take any more screenshots or anything. But this is just to give a sense of what he set up for us and the lights in the right positions. Yeah. This is nothing. This is not a cue. This is not what we lit. This is just him turning the odd light on.
What was that? This is your favourite cue in the show?
It's horrendous, doesn't it? But it just gives some idea on what we were sort of working with.
Totally.
That's a photo of Tom in our little WYSIWYG studio in 3 Mills, where we spent a week together.
It's brilliant.
It's quite handy being at 3 Mills because that's where the cast were also rehearsing.
Yeah. So
I went and watched one of the run-throughs during the previous week, and so I had a bit of an idea of what was happening during the show and stuff like that. So it was handy being in the same location. Yeah,
just fighting for the same thing. I mean, especially so much of the relationship between you two is based on timings and in the way this is. We'll see that in a minute, but the way it's put together. I mean, it must be so handy having that context for you, Tom.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I'd love to see a run through of a show if I can do.
Yeah.
Right, time code. So we had the ability to time code. Every single number in the show was had time code with it. The whole show is recorded. Every single cue in the show that can be is recorded to time code.
Yeah.
But we don't use any of it. And this comes down to other members of the creative team not necessarily trusting it, not wanting to rely on it. So that's how it ended up. But that's probably, yeah. I would have loved to have used it because I just think, it gives you a reliability and it gives you a tightness and slickness. Ultimately, it became a bit of a political thing that I think people started to get worried about it. So, but it's just funny to think that that's just an example of some of the keys recorded. But we recorded every single number in the show.
Towards the end of the production process, they did a lot of music calls and sessions like that. So they'd play the whole songs with just the company on stage, just singing for the sound department and for the music department. So I used a lot of that time to just sit there because obviously sound were sending the time code with all the click tracks whilst they were doing all these sessions. So I just recorded all the time code points for all the cues just so we had them.
Yeah. I've got time code questions. Isn't this a good time for time code questions for Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, I might have to hand over to Tom for more technical things.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, number one, like when someone says to you, right, we're going to time code this whole thing, does that put you up and down? I mean, does your heart sink, or are you like, great?
No, not at all. I mean, it's sort of indifferent to me. It's I mean, it's a little bit extra work, yeah, but Howard's a very sort of advanced lighting designer. He understands what time code is and how to use it and when to use it.
Yeah.
So it's not like as the programmer, it's all on me to make sure the time code works.
Sure.
Which I know in previous shows it sort of has been a little bit. It's like, oh, you're the programmer, you'll deal with that. But no, it doesn't really change how I would approach the show at all. It's just a different way of triggering it versus having a DSM saying go.
And how do you? I mean, how much do you have to consider things like programming when you're doing such a long amount of tech and previews? Like, especially when you're using timecode, like disabling it and re-enabling it. I mean, you can really trip yourself up quite quickly, can't you?
Yeah, you absolutely can. You just have to be really on top of that. And for knowing this would be such a show control heavy show, I actually set up all my macros on the front of the TI to toggle off all the different things, the SMPTE, the MIDI, and all sorts. But not that we really used much of it in the end. We used MIDI for some sound cue triggers, but we never actually used any of the time code, as the whole show ended up called by the DSM.
Yeah. And did you between the two of you, did you input times in advance, or did you use the learn function?
We did most of the times by just learning them during the sound calls, when the spotlight wasn't on us as such to light the show or to be part of tech. We were just.
I think maybe going forward, if the show moves on somewhere, it might be tremendously useful to have all this information in there. You know, when you start working with new stage management teams, and if it, touch wood, if it does go on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my final question on the timecode bit is, I want to ask you about beats per minute and stuff. I mean, obviously when you're timecoding that with a click track, that's sort of one thing, but with a band that's on click and you guys so regimented as well, but not together, is there not quite a big risk that if that first cue's off, they're all like, the It's My Life, they're all going to be off?
Have you got that thing that the sound department sent? Yeah, here. So the sound department made a full document of the tempos and the clicks and the start bars and end bars and loop bars. So it was all planned out quite well in advance, I think, with the MD and with the music department. But
do you end up in all I mean is if you're running to whatever it is, 120 beats per minute, and then R2, but the go is like seconds off from the op. Does that not end up in? Do you end up in a big pickle?
Do you mean without time code, Rory? We're not using time code.
Yeah. As in, like, because you have all these follows and hangs and stuff.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, tricky. Yeah.
Which is why, you can just be sat at the back of the stalls putting your hair out, saying, "Why can't we use time code?" But
yeah. Yeah, I'm with you.
So the only bit of footage we have of the previews is coming up, and I don't know why we didn't. I don't know why we didn't record more of it. So apologies. Looks pretty atrocious, but you can see how we just use lights on or off basically to a very early recording of the show. So. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can see it's all late and all over the top, and you don't get any sense of what the beams in the air will properly look like, but it's basically just roughing effects in and roughing lights in.
But that's a perfect example of what we used the previs for, and that was to get positions in, get the timings of the cues in and the effects.
Yeah.
All the things that take too long to do during tech that we could just sit in a room on our own and get on with. So yeah, it was really good to have the big numbers.
Massively, yeah.
Mm.
So moving on, we're nearly there, everyone. We're nearly there. So just a couple more pictures. So this is sort of hopefully in real time. So this is a bit a bit more progressed. So you can see ladders like on wonky angles. And, sort of slightly more of the front of house going in. This is just an example of me, how I might show the production electrician where the strobe should go on the truss, as it turned out. We can see how big these speakers were that we were having to sort of work around. This was at the Shaftesbury, actually. Massive sound system.
Yeah. A lot of real estate to fight for, isn't there?
Well, exactly. You think of that cross beam as being like one of the most intrinsic, like, important positions. Trying to squeeze lights in there is not easy. Many late hours, genuinely late hours with the sound department, looking at it going, how do we? All right, so then a few like the fun things we've got on the show. Cause I thought we quite. I've got more videos of this than the previous. So these are the bubbles filled with smoke, which we all enjoyed. Or I just thought I'd show because it's quite cool. I don't really see them much, so.
They're mega. Whose idea were these?
I think they might have been Tom Johnson, the production electricians, actually.
It's brilliant.
He sent me a link saying, why don't we have these? And I was like, oh, and there's another example of where the bubbles went for a section. Bubble machines. You see how all the work stops. And then, right, so these are called, it's a bit technical here, but these are called char bars. Clay Packy make them, and you don't see them much, but I just thought I'd show you them because I thought everyone laughed at me drawing them, and then they turned out to be one of the most fun things in the show, I thought.
The strobes in the background are video, they're not
Yeah, that's video. Yeah, that's see-through video screen.
Yeah.
And then just there's low fog. What's interesting about this, actually, just interesting point, is wall space is these cumulus, and so it meant running costs are really low in terms of the fluid. It's distilled water it uses.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And then tech start, so just to really quickly go over, so we used to have the mornings to light ahead for the day ahead, so any bits that we hadn't done. Obviously having to work around other departments who are working on stage or fixing things or getting screened out to turn the working light on all the time. And then, integrating the follow slots into the show, which is where Dale really came into his own in terms of really, really complicated spot plot. Just having to work all that out. We ended up with 3 follow spots. Always ask for one more than you need. We ended up with 3. And then just working with Andre, Andre Goulding, who's the video designer, who's like a tremendous collaborator in terms of us giving ideas to each other, particularly about colour and in terms of where we might go for a particular look of something. And a lot of that happened in the tech, which was quite exciting. And then just the point, we had this really, really mega useful camera on the balcony front, so really high up in the front of house in the theatre, which meant while we were in the stalls, we had a screen next to our desk, which meant we could see the floor really clearly, and it was sort of like an HD camera. So it just saved a huge amount of time because it meant when we went upstairs, Tom had already roughed in, if I were to say swing 5 lights down centre, you can look at that camera and use that to settle the positions. Whereas if you were trying to do that using the light in the air, you'd never come close, not being able to see the floor. Yeah.
In those morning plotting sessions, how detailed are you in those? You're about to spend full chunks of your day looking at them. How is it? Big, broad brushstrokes? Or?
I suppose, it is, because often you're lighting ahead for something that you don't even have the scenery in for, so you're basically just roughing in units where you think they might be neat, might be neat. The good thing about a show like this is obviously we text quite slowly. We had a lot of time, so it wasn't like we were going to be covering tons of numbers in the afternoon and the evening. We knew that we only had to get a little, whereas Tom and I have done shows in the past and you have to race about 1 in the morning. So it meant that we could go a bit more, or we might have also gone over in the morning problems we had the day before in terms of fixing stuff that we didn't have time to do. But mainly lighting ahead, and we had a really good time. I was thinking tech, it's like when you run out of keys, it's like falling off a cliff. So it often happens about 9:30 before the session ends at 10 when you're lighting a show, and then you're looking ahead in your key list that you got, and you realise that you've got no data in for those keys that are coming up, and you're praying that the session finishes before you get to that point. Otherwise, just start live, and it's literally like falling off a cliff edge. But on this, we managed because we had a bit more time and resources. We were able to keep ahead of it, which is good. So
totally.
Oh yeah, I thought a couple of examples of just the spot sheets that Dale put together.
What's your relationship with Dale on this? I mean, do you give him any sort of instruction or direction, or do you just leave it up to his discretion, or how does it work?
A huge amount was down to Dale on this. Like in terms of, I think what we'd done is we'd looked at a video of the show and we'd come up with sort of a rough structure to the follow spots, you know. But then the brilliant thing is Dale was able to just sort of look after these. You know, if you're trying to light a really busy show with lots of lights, it's really hard at the same time to be thinking, I think spot 3 should be on that person, spot 1 should be on that person. I basically would let Dale get on with it. If I noticed something that I thought could be tweaked, or, you know, or I had an idea, then I'd tell him. But yeah, did a phenomenal job. And you see how complicated some of this stuff is.
Yeah, very impressive.
With 3 spots. Basically, they're on for the whole. They like the whole show ultimately. Yeah. And then, here's just. Sorry, Tom, but this is. I've just put this in. It's basically the only photo any of us have of the production desk once again, which is like astonishing considering we're doing the show for 3 or 4 months. But it just gives an idea of how we use that camera on the balcony front, looking down on the stage floor, and just how useful that was. Yeah, we could take the seats out, and we had like nice chairs and stuff. I'm not sure quite. I don't think they were out by this point. Just an idea of
how on a show this, like with this much video on it. How do you go up, like divvying up your time in the morning? I mean, do you have to plot the same stuff, or do you just work on top of each other? Like,
no, I think we ended up just disconnecting, didn't we, Tom? So we could just do our own thing. Yeah. And they could just work, and we would work. Sometimes, I mean, when they were dealing with really bright stuff, it became really hard. Yeah. But often we were having to do those morning sessions with working light on anyway, because, you know, the set department were working and fixing stuff, and so it's like lighting with your eyes closed. It's about looking at the screen reading and saying that light's on in that position, like that colour, and hoping for. And actually, this is interesting that I got given this brilliant. Well, Tom Johnson, production edition, gave me this like brilliant old school 6-way controller, which meant that I was able to have control of the work light. So when we're teching, you know, I spend half my time saying to Tom, "Oh, careful, you know, work light on before you plunge them into darkness," you know. So I was able to sort of keep tabs on that and just make sure that, so Tom didn't have to worry about it, basically.
Yeah. By work light, we sort of mean a series of like source 4 bars and stuff over the whole rig that the production electrician puts in and we control, rather than just like work lights. That's what this is the control for.
Yeah, that's great. It's handy.
It was great for me to be able to light in all these nice stickers. Anyway, and this is just an example of. I just thought we'd have a really quick discussion about how we sort of coloured the show, coming up with these. So in most shows that I do, we would come up with, on the left-hand side, is sort of this structure, not really using gel numbers. It's sort of, you have a tungsten mix, a light amber mix, a medium amber mix, a dark amber mix, and then a darker amber mix. Then you have a grey blue, a light blue, medium blue. So on every show, I'd set these across the whole rig, so every type of moving light, every type of LED. Yeah. And show to show, it might differ slightly. So, you know, the dark blue might be a bit greener on some shows, or a bit redder, but at least you know across the whole rig, every type of light, depending on what different emitters they have or different colour mixing ways they have, you know that you've got this sort of palette set up. And I think what it's useful for is setting that continuity throughout the piece in terms of your colour choices. Yeah. I think it's sometimes dangerous if you start using gel numbers, for instance. Once you know, you're relying on a desk having mixed those colours, or people having mixed those colours for you. Also, you know, this restricts you to this smaller selection, which I think, you know, there might be the odd, if you look at the right hand side, there might be the odd sort of more specific things that we needed for set pieces or particular moments. But on the whole, the colours on the left were the majority of the show. And then I think we're nearly there. I think it might be time to watch a few. Oh no, we've got a few more. Yeah, this was just, I thought it'd be interesting to put in a little screenshot of a section of the show where you can see sort of follow on how busy it is. Sort of.
Lots of follow-ons attached to one cue, timing out.
And we did all this work in
the whole bar or 4 bars of a number, so that DSM has a bit of an easier call.
Yeah, I think that's 4 bars worth.
Yeah,
4 bars are brilliant.
I think they could have time coded all that, but at the same time, you need to make it callable should the time code go down. So, you Yeah. So it's sort of like that balancing act, isn't it? Between, or then, you know, the argument is, do you have a simpler show if the time code goes down? And actually the DSM still calls it, but you miss out. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's an interesting discussion about the ethics of time code.
And how does that timing these things out? I mean, it must take ages to get the fulls and hangs bang on. Like, who's responsible for that? I mean, is it just between you, Tom? Do you just jump in when you see it's not right, or?
We did it. We did all that in previs.
Yeah.
The previs we spent making all these follow times and stuff. Yeah, do it, try it, adjust it. Howard's pretty on it with numbers, so.
The annoying thing with this is, you know, if you've got 4, you know, you've got 4 repeats, you don't have to change each one.
Yeah.
Which is because it needs to be called. You know, you could. Can you do a number of links? I don't know. Can you say link or loop 4 times or something? I don't know how that works.
You can, but I mean, it's just easier for us to have proper numbered cues.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we do well.
So I know we're coming up to time, aren't we? So
no, you're fine as long as you've got the time. We've got the time, don't we?
Oh, okay. And then just an example of the magic sheet that Tom put together for the set electrics.
This was set electrics because
I should say the fonts have changed for some reason, haven't they?
yeah, because I loaded it into the new version of the software and it's all gone a bit odd.
Yeah.
Because set electrics is so hard to remember numbers for and stuff, which I don't think anybody ever can. I always just try and make a magic sheet of it just so I can grab stuff very quickly. Without having to look up numbers and stuff.
Yeah, very handy.
And then, so this is just a screenshot of, so brilliantly, the video department would produce these recordings every single day. So we were able to look in the morning in the Dropbox, and one of these, so what this is it's Stamp, which is records, what's the best way to describe it? Records the go presses, but it records what happens.
Yeah, so it'll record all the go presses. It'll record the time code that sounds send. It can also capture all of the video triggers and all that sort of stuff, all into the same program.
And they would put this sort of next to the copy of the show, and it meant that it's just absolutely mega useful for working out, especially to sit down with the director and go through in the mornings, you know, to work out notes and note positions.
Yeah.
What his notes might be. To be able to there and then say, oh, well, that's that key number, that's that key number, rather than then spending another hour afterwards trying to decipher what he meant. You know, so we were able to look at this recording together. Just so incredibly useful. And they did this for every preview, which was just like, we could have done it ourselves. We never quite got the Stamp up and running properly, did we? I can't
No, so I had a Stamp set up, which I sort of built and took to Manchester to use, but the video department also had a setup. And they had a much, much better camera attached to theirs. And so for them to listen to our network and pick up our Go presses was a cable and a setting. So we just tagged onto them and they sent us these lovely videos that they produced.
It's like so unbelievably useful.
At one point, I remember taking a picture of everyone crowded around our little production desk computer. And that was like the director, the choreographer, Max Martin, Howard was there. Sound department.
Watching last night's show,
just watching that last snippet because something had changed or gone wrong or something, and they were working out and can tell instantly what it was and which queue number and which, you know, all that sort of stuff. It's really handy.
So handy, yeah.
It's like the best thing, yeah. So that's the end of that section. Now, there's the thought, Rory, that we might watch a couple of bits.
Yeah, if you, what we'll do is we could watch a couple of these and then do a couple more questions, then we'll sort of wrap up, really.
Great, yeah.
What?
You decide.
Do you want to stop your screen share?
Oh yeah, I'll do that. Yeah,
yeah. So let me try and.
So this is interesting, I think, because we've got the DSM calling it, and we've got the key numbers. Yeah.
Yeah. So
really clever. Well done, Rory. Rory's put this together, by the way. This is really.
It's been a team effort in this house to fit this. But yes, so let's see. But I think the thing to listen out for is like how much is called versus the time code thing. Like it would be, you can see the benefit of both. I think so. Hopefully this will work.
LXQ 701. Go.
There we go.
Busy old show. It's a constant stream of chat from Adam, isn't it? It's
Yeah, I should say that is Adam Tripp, who is incredible, the most brilliant DSM.
Yeah,
it's-
Absolutely
it's-
stellar.
yeah. No, it's
Amazing.
brilliant. I had a couple of little things. Please do send in questions, folks, just as we start to wrap up, really. But I mean, these are sort of combination of questions for both of you. But I mean, Howard, do you ever worry that you've completely misunderstood a director on like a big West End gig like this? I appreciate his look and your pals, but still, do you ever have that worry?
Do you mean like about specific things like choices and?
Yeah, like just generally, do you ever have a conversation and think, great, we know where we're at? And then
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. I think it's totally fine to have misunderstood someone and then arrive at it. The problem is if you don't have the resources to do what they want, that's when you start sweating and you start going, oh crap, you know. Or if you sort of gelled the wrong colour. A bit more the reason, you know, talking about what we were before about having flexibility and making sure you're covered.
Yeah. How much of the show actually changed between Manchester and town? I mean, like, it must be so nice to get to do it all over again.
Yeah, I think actually a lot less than we thought. We thought we were going to go into London. I mean, we ended up in London actually sort of twiddling thumbs slightly, you know. Not that, I don't mean that with any arrogance or anything, but I think it just comes from the producers and the team having had such a good process leading up to it happening in Manchester. Yeah, years of workshop, years of. It wasn't like they opened in Manchester and then thought, "Crap, we need to rewrite half the show."
Yeah.
Same with us, I suppose. Yeah, we spent so much time preparing and working on it in Manchester, but I think we arrived in London. Yeah, I mean there were tweaks. They changed bits of things, and we upgraded things. We were able to spend more time on bits, you know. But thank heavens, yeah, it's sort of a relatively smooth process.
Yeah. And Tom, I mean, for you, like you saw it in the column there. I mean, the amount of effects in this show are like bonkers. The amount that's even into one cue. How do you go about managing that? Like, that's so much for your brain to manage.
Yeah, so a big thing about this show is because it's such a big rig is data management. So even just the channeling of the fixtures, like all those strobes on the back are all individual cells. There's like 6 cells to each strobe, and there's a lot of effects, a lot of pixel mapping going on. Yeah, data management is a really big thing for programmers now that we're sort of almost 100% digital in everything.
Do you make the effect number the same as the key number?
Yeah, so I'll do that a lot. So if a moving light has a preset for that cue, the preset number will generally be the cue number, just so I can keep on top of presets. And the same with effects, I try and keep that the same as well. So if you look down the cue list, you'll see the start of each number, which is like 1001 or 1201. The effects in there will usually be 1201 onwards. Just because I've made specific effects for that song in case the tempo changes or whatever.
Yeah, the danger is not to reuse effects, isn't it? In a show like this, where you're dealing with lots of different tempos.
Yeah, because
it's always copy the effects and make a new one. Yeah. So otherwise you can really cut yourself up. Yeah.
So yeah, I'll generally reference things by the cue number that it's in, just so it's in there.
Yeah. And do you ever? I mean, like, there's no denying that in terms of quantity, like, it's a big gig. I mean, do you ever get nervous when you're watching a preview or something and think, oh God, I really hope I've caught such and such?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few minor things during previews. I mean, I was always nearby to take stuff out or move stuff if it had accidentally moved into the wrong position.
I don't think we never had the house lights go on, did we? I don't think so.
No house light issues, no. Pretty good for house lights.
Was it really a show if that didn't happen? I don't know. There's a couple of questions for you, Tom, here. Come in. How many universes did the rig use?
Oh, hang on, I've got all this information. So we used 8,607 addresses over 7, so that's about 17 universes worth, spread over 28 universes that the Produlex managed.
Wow. And another question for you. I'm guessing you have a base show file you work from. What does that contain on a big show like this?
So I have a base show file and it will contain colours, effects, patches for general units that we use all the time, like Vipers, Auras. However, on this particular show, there was no fixtures that I'd really used before, apart from the Sharpie washes. So our main profile was Icon Stages, an LED big profile. We had GLP,
X4
XLs or X4Ls as the main wash light. We had char bars, which I'd never used. We had icon edges, icon beams. So we had a lot of fixtures I'd not used before. So the base show bar wasn't particularly useful on this one, but on most shows where we go in and it's Vipers and Auras or something like that, then I've already got all the beam palette set up, all the colour palette set up, rig checks set up. It just gives you a big old head start, really. Saves you having to sit there and program another rig check and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And what? Another question here that's coming. What did you use for follow spots with an intensive show like this? Did you use units that were getting colour from the desk?
No,
I think they're Serranos, weren't they?
Yeah.
Serranos.
Yeah.
Oh, Dale piping up.
Hello.
Hi, Dale. There's actually a question for you, Dale.
Is there?
Yeah, you're around. Which is...
oh, God.
Hello.
Any tips on managing follows on a big show like this?
So I always end up starting on paper. So I attended a rehearsal with Howard right at the start, watched it and recorded it. I then go off before I come to the next rehearsal and I actually write it all out on paper, because this is how I work. Easier to put it out on paper. And then I will then stick it into Spot Track. But there is other versions of stuff. I'm about to try using a different program for a concert me and Howard have got coming up. And then I'll then take that back into rehearsals and basically check what I've written against what's actually happening again in the rehearsal to check I'm actually on the right page.
Nice.
And then when we're actually in tech, I also have the paper grid that I use next to me. So when we get to a big point, like every time we ran Domino at the start of tech, it changed so much and I can't type that quickly. So I would literally just write it down, deal with what was happening there and then, get to like the next quiet bit and then go back and deal with it.
Yeah. It's a tricky thing to balance. Like in
I have to say they like the whole show, as follow spots often do, musicals are absolutely fundamental. One of the most important aspects of the lighting rig actually and the people that operate them.
Yeah.
We've been quite lucky with our operators that they are quite good and they're on it.
Yeah. I imagine that's pretty big part of your job. If they're not, I imagine that can make it a lot harder.
Yeah, I don't think we would have just had to get someone new. Like at points, it's too busy a show to not have someone that can pull their weight. Like all 3 spots are ridiculously busy. It's not as if you could have gone, okay, swap round, you can have the easier spot. Like all 3 are hard. And other than spot 2, which nearly always does Juliet, they're all swapping amongst the characters. And it's intense at times.
Yeah, it's intense. Don't go anywhere because I have more questions in a minute. Another one here, Howard. What's the colour like on shower bars, considering they are bouncing light off a mirror?
Yeah, good point. I mean, I have to say they're very, very primitive lights, not particularly bright. They get out of line and they never line up properly. But they sort of gave us a different, left to right light curtain. The colour-wise is sort of fine, I think. Pretty, basic. It's just RGBW, isn't it? I think. Just emitters.
Yeah.
And even when they're all on at full, it's not particularly bright. But
they're a lot brighter than we thought they were going to be, though, weren't they?
Yeah, they're a success.
Because on the WYSIWYG model, they were like as bright as anything else on there, so we were really limiting expectations.
I remember you saying they fill the final third of the picture really nicely.
Yeah, and another layer, if you're thinking that you've got all of the actual theatre, which we like, you've then got the video, you've got the gauze with projection on it, then you've got that light curtain look in front of all of that, which blurs all of that. Yeah. That part of the picture. I think it's a nice. We were going to have them all around the sides, but that was a cut from.
Yeah, well, that'd been quite something.
Yeah.
I'm going to start wrapping up because it's been fantastic. But and you shouldn't have got involved, Dale, because you're now going to be part of this. I've been doing 5 quick fire questions with everyone at the end. So we'll do it. Tom, Howard, Dale. So I want to know worst habit at work. Panic you last minute with these questions.
God, I don't know. Howard would probably be able to tell you this better than I would. Panning or tilting the light the wrong way to start.
Yeah, that's true.
There we go, got it.
Is it me?
Yep.
I tut, and I'm not aware that I'm tutting, and I get told off it all the time on cans. Yeah.
Okay.
I need to get better at not tutting. Yeah.
Dale?
I would say getting hangry and then taking it out on other people at the production desk when they're giving you a very nice note, and you kind of go off on one when you should just like, yep, okay, cool, I can deal with that, but it's because I'm hungry. And
That's brilliant. One show that you'd love to work on that's on your sort of career bucket list, as it were, Tom?
Hamilton will be alright.
Nice. Howard?
I should think what I've got. What's New Pussycat, which is going to be at Leeds Playhouse next year.
Brilliant.
Tom Jones musical. Fingers crossed.
Dale?
I'd love to do something at Regent's Park because I've never actually worked on a show there, and I'd love to just deal with the uniqueness of doing that venue.
Yeah, we'll try and find you someone that does some stuff there, Dale. I don't know if you know a guy. That's Howard does that.
If I just
one or two things. What was your favourite part of the process on Anne Juliet? Tom?
For me, I would say tech. Tech was great. It was a really good vibe. Everyone worked together really collaboratively. Yeah, really enjoyed tech.
I think the first preview in Manchester, because it was the first time any of us had seen the public reaction to the show. And we would detect it very nicely, but we didn't know what it was. And then the crowd went absolutely mad for it. So it was like a brilliant evening, I thought.
Yeah. Dale?
I was literally going to say first preview, but Howard stole off. I'd
say as well.
Say that just how collaborative everyone was during tech. Like, there was no raised voices. Everyone bounced ideas off each other. And just having been in shows where tech becomes a massive stress and raised voices and people shouting at each other when it doesn't need to be, and it was just a dream.
Brilliant. And my final question that you'll all hate, but you're going to have to go for it. If you were to write an autobiography right now, what would you call it?
Working with Howard Hudson.
That's hard.
What was yours, Tom?
Working with Howard Hudson.
Howard Hudson, brilliant.
Oh God, Rory, that's really hard. What, an autobiography? What would you?
Yeah. What would you call it?
My Life in Light.
Oh.
Awful.
You were even warned about this question, Howard. Goodness.
Really?
Yeah. Dale, what would you call yours?
I'm not sure. I'm not much of a writer.
That could be it. Dale Driscoll. I'm not much of a writer.
Yeah, just go with that then.
man behind the spot.
Oh, nice. Listen, thank you all so much. That's us. But it's been fantastic. Thank you for Howard putting in effort and making a presentation, and thank you both for being here and answering all these. Thank you.
I hope it was useful.
It's fantastic, and it's really nice to see the part of the process that you don't generally ever get access to. So, thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you, Rory. Thanks for doing all your work.